Hey guys, this is DFD, aka Dark Frozen Depths, back with another Kamihime project video. This is one I've meant to do a lot sooner, but there's been things that's kind of gotten in the way a little bit. And at one point I've honestly forgotten about it because I'm balancing a whole bunch of different games and whatnot, but recently there's been quite a few things where it's brought it to my attention again. So here's the other part of that video that I've done before where it covered the standard to ultimate raids. So this is going to cover the Ragnarok raids and the Guardian raids. Now, Guardians count as Ragnarok level, but I'm calling them Guardians because they are completely different enemies from the disasters and the catastrophes. But anyways, these raids are going to be very difficult. They are, without a doubt, the hardest fights in the game, even more so than events. So you do want to be able to reliably clear the ultimate raids on your own in order to try and take a crack at these ones. And they are, without a doubt, annoying to deal with, even if you are strong enough to handle them. You have to pay attention, and quite frankly, that auto battle stuff is not going to cut it this time. You might be able to auto previous ones, but there may be one or two exceptions to these fights, but you're generally not going to be able to auto them. Now, the whole thing with these fights too is the fact that they will give some very, very powerful stuff. The catastrophe fights will generally give you the phantom weapons, the Ragnarok versions of the catastrophes. They will drop phantom weapons. It's not a frequent drop rate, but I've just recently got my 4th one, so it does happen. As for the Guardians, they can drop weapons of their own, and there's 3 different types per Guardian. But you can actually get the materials to go get those weapons on your own. So you can get extras, you can grind out the stuff you can need to trade for them, so be it. Speaking of which, when raid medals become tradable, you can get phantom weapons then, so don't worry if you don't get any lucky drops right now. But for the time being, it's best to try and get your phantom weapons from the catastrophe fights in order to try and get some very, very powerful effects. And I won't necessarily go over those weapons, but keep in mind that the phantom weapons, you need 6 of the same type of weapon, including the phantom weapon itself. You can indeed use soul weapons for this. So if you want an axe grid, you can get something like, say, Arthur's HP axe or Hercules' elemental axe. You can have the phantom axe itself, and then you got to get 4 other axes. That said, if you keep the panel swords separate, you only need the phantom sword and 1 more sword. That is the easiest, most accessible phantom weapon setup you can get. So even newer players should probably keep that stuff separate. The sword itself isn't all that great, but at the same time, it's still better than nothing because it's the second thing that these phantom weapons do. Their original effect, I know for a fact you need at least 6 of the weapon type in order to activate it. So it might be something like, say, a lot of HP or a lot of assault, or it could give you a huge combo rate with, say, like some boost in ability damage or something like that. The original effect, if I recall, does not need any sort of requirements. You just stick the phantom weapon on a grid and you get it. That is going to increase the base stats of HP and attack for all the weapons. Now, granted, I could still be wrong about that, but even if you have 6 weapons of the same type, you're still going to get that effect anyway, so keep that in mind. But if it is indeed true that you can do that, that is a huge chunk of power to your grid. This is how some people have gotten some very, very high numbers. So that said, you do want these phantom weapons. Now, you can't always use them because it still depends on what the game gives you and what you have access to grind out. But if you can use them, by all means do so. It's not even a bad idea to use some SR weapons to get that. Now, as for the Guardian weapons, those you can grind out. You can probably pick and choose which ones you want. Some are very, very powerful, but keep in mind that without the Demon Union events, which have been confirmed to repeat again on DMM, but this is still a long ways away. But without them, you don't really have too much access to the Exceed weapon. So if you really need Exceed right now, you might want to do that, because it's going to be practically a year before the first one even shows up. So that said, you do need to pretty much get Exceed weapons from the Guardians. Otherwise, you're going to have some really out of the way methods of getting Exceed weapons, unless an event's so lucky and throws one your way. But they haven't been lately, so who knows. But more so, you cannot get SSR copies of the Disasters and the Catastrophes, but you can indeed get SSR copies of the Guardians, and they are very, very strong. Those do not drop from the raids, but you can trade for them. Except for this Phantom one, they will all do the same effect, and that is a multiplier on whatever weapon skills you have, basically. Say you have 100% assault, and you have a maxed out Light Guardian, then you now have 140% assault. And it's not just limited to that. It'll work on Assault, Defender, Pride, Vigor, Ascension, Exceed, all of it. So it is very, very strong. I am using it myself. I have roughly about 175% Assault on my grid, and about 112% Defender. That's skyrocketing to the numbers that you're seeing in these videos. And it can still push it even further if I have better stuff, so keep that in mind. So those Guardians can be very powerful, plus a lot of their summon effects are very, very good. But the summon effect and the main effect both increase with break limits, so you have to keep getting more and more copies of them. The only exception to this rule is a Phantom Guardian, where it's still the same general effect, rule set, where it's like you break limit it and it gets stronger with its main effect and its summon effect. But the Phantom Guardian is utter garbage when you set in this main. I'm not kidding on that, because it is nothing but a beefed up Willem. The Phantom Willem, if anybody knows, you had to have 3 mixed elements, and then you had to, and then it'll give you a large amount of assault. Pretty much the same thing, only this time it comes with an item drop rate increase, which shouldn't be affected by who's on your team. But not really worth the trouble of setting it as a main. You might still want to get her, because all these Guardians have scenes, but there's that. But at the same time, if you don't really have the other Phantom add-ons, then maybe you might want to get her. Generally speaking, if you get SSR Diablos, which is arguably the best Phantom add-on, then yeah. But other than that, who knows? But keep this one thing in mind too, that it takes materials, except for the Phantom Guardian, it takes materials from both the Catastrophe and the Guardian fights in order to get a Guardian add-on. So you will have to do both. So if you're looking to get one of them, get used to grinding out the items, which are specifically Cavis, which comes from only the Ragnarok Catastrophes, not the Ultimate, and Treasures, which only comes from Guardians. You need both of them. You're going to need Treasures for the weapons as well, but thankfully not the Cavis. And since we're going to have 4th tier souls, as in new souls that are stronger than the ones we got, you're going to need to grind this stuff too. Both of them. So that's all I got to say for this opener. Sorry it took a while, but that's a lot to really jump into. Now then, going into the fights themselves, this is where things get a little bit tricky. If you remember the format from the previous video, I'm going to go through it like that. But okay, this is a Guardians. I went into the wrong one. I meant to go into the Catastrophes. But generally from the previous format, I'm more or less going to go into what the boss has and the general strategies for it. It can be a troublesome fight if you're not prepared, so be very, very careful. I've seen people fail these fights, so yeah. But anyways, to the best of my knowledge, every single fight I'm talking about in this video is going to have 10 defense, so it's a normal defense amount. You also need to be very high ranks in order to do it, but I've covered the ranks in the previous video, I believe. And keep in mind that every Ragnarok Catastrophe fight has helpers in the fight, so you're not just fighting the boss. Be very careful of that. Everything seems to have special mechanics about itself too. So be very careful. But starting off with fire, 120 million HP for the main boss. Yes, I said 120 million. It is a lot of HP. And this still isn't the worst of it either. As for her helpers, they're each sitting at 37,500,000 HP. Now granted, when you get stronger, you can start doing bursts on one enemy for like 10 million plus. So it won't seem like that much then, but when you start off, these numbers can seem pretty daunting. But anyways, going into the info on what the bosses do. I will make this simple with the helpers on this because they generally do the same crap. But the helpers just do normal attacks unless they are targeted. As in, you target one of them and do normal attacks. So make sure you're doing your targeting correctly. If the upper one gets hit, it is defense down. If the lower one gets hit, it is attack down. So if you hit one of those two with normal attacks, it's going to do that. And they are stackable for 5 turns. Now, as for the boss itself, it's got many different mechanics, but you need to pay attention to a few of them. First and foremost, normal mode. If its orbs is full, it's going to randomly hit 3 times and also increase its attack power. If it hits the same character multiple times, it could be pretty bad. But the attack power increase is a little bit threatening. However, in raging mode, it just hits everybody. Simple. It just hits your whole team. Now, just off of that alone, the perfect time to remove its attack increase, its fire attribute increase, is while it's in raging mode. That way it's not going to come back on for a while. Now, here's where things get a little bit tricky. If both its helpers are present, and 10 turns have passed, it's going to start spamming some very large hits to everybody when its orbs is max. If the upper one is killed, it's going to do the same thing. But it's going to be a different sort of attack, basically. If the lower helper is killed, it's going to randomly hit twice when it does the full orbs after 10 turns. And regardless of whether or not 10 turns have passed or whatever, if both helpers are gone and its orbs are maxed, one time it's going to remove all of its debuffs and increase its resistance towards debuffs. And you cannot erase it, it will never wear out. That makes a fight a lot harder because it makes it harder to debuff it. So you have to be very careful to not kill both the helpers. In fact, my suggestion to you, focus on the boss. Now, if you're like me and have Awakened Arrows, who has an ability where she will absorb debuffs and in turn turn it into burst gauge for all her allies or anybody who's affected by it, that's the one time you target the helpers, but only to just cause them to do their trigger. So in my case, I have Awakened Arrows. I will target the helpers with 1 round of normal attacks, nothing more. Trigger that ailment absorption and get the free burst gauge. Other than that, I am nuking the boss and I'm focusing on her. However, since when you do multiple bursts, the burst streak will hit the entire enemy group, there could be a chance where, and I've seen it happen, where there's players that's doing so much burst damage that they actually kill the helpers anyway. Either way, you want to target the boss as much as possible. If you are not using Awakened Arrows, then you should not be targeting the helpers at all. It doesn't matter what they do, just do not target them. That said, you can still sometimes see them die because people are doing enough burst damage in order to take them out. They do have like 1/4 the health of the boss. But most fights you probably won't see that happen. The only time, and I repeat, the only time you should ever target either helper in a firefight is if you're using the ability from Awakened Arrows to actually absorb burst gauge. Because it will cause one of them to debuff your team, and you just give everybody 20 burst gauge just because she blocked it. That is the only time you target them. Otherwise, don't even bother. Attack the main boss no matter what. Just save all your debuffs and everything for the main boss. But that said too, the main boss can actually deal a lot of damage, so you do want to bring some debuffs. You might want to increase its orb count, but you definitely want to get that attack power increase off of it whenever it's in raging mode. because otherwise you're going to get hit pretty hard. There's been some stories of people getting hit for like 15,000 plus, so yeah. Now then, for the water Ragnarok one. They say estimates, so I can't really give you flat numbers. But thankfully, this one only has one helper. But it's guaranteed that every last one of the catastrophes has 9-digit HP, and all the helpers have 8-digit HP, so keep that in mind. The helpers are generally going to have at least 30 million, I'm pretty sure of that. And the main bosses themselves, generally about 120 million or more. So yeah, there's that. Now then, with the Ragnarok fight. This is one I haven't done too much because I haven't really had too much focus on water, but I'm going to start doing that more because I'm going to go after the Guardians. Because I want to get all the Guardian Adolins. The Helper loves protecting its boss and loves buffing it. Keep that in mind. So you do want to be able to take out the Helper first. You do want to be able to take out the Helper first. Simple as that. Now, it's going to put some damage cut on the boss. It's going to put water attribute on it. And it's dependent on what happens to your team. Now, the damage cut always happens whenever there's normal attacks going off or whatever. As for the attribute increase, it's dependent on if one of your characters has like sleep status or if its health is cut in half. It's something you have to more or less pay attention to, but at the same time, you do not want to be taking more damage, so keep that in mind. It also has its own burst where it will lower your attack power, so be very wary of that. For the boss itself, it also can apply defense up on everybody. So being able to remove buffs is really helpful in this fight. And it will randomly hit regardless of whether it's in normal or raging. It's just more damage in raging. And it probably can kill somebody if you're not lucky. If you're really not lucky, you can see 5 hits of like 4,000 plus. So there you go. But as for the special moves, it's pretty much based on if there's nobody in sleep, then it's going to try and hit everybody. But at the same time, it still tries to put somebody in sleep as well. So that's generally what it's trying to do. It's trying to more or less limit your actions. And then on top of that, if it's got a water attribute increase, then you will not like the results. Because it's going to remove all of its debuffs, and on top of that, hit everybody very, very hard. Your general strategy is to make sure that you have some debuff resistance and make sure those buffs are not on the boss. Because you're going to get hit pretty hard. It is 5,000 damage, 5-digit damage AoE. So be very careful with this fight. My suggestion to you is to take out the Helper first, because that's definitely the biggest bulk of the fight. It's going to be lowering the damage you do to the boss and everything. So, definitely hit the Helper first. Now then, win Ragnarok Catastrophe. I've had plenty of experience with this fight, because I've been helping a union member grind it out. But this fight's annoying. This fight's very annoying. Anyways, both helpers have 25 million HP. The boss itself has 120 million HP. This fight has so many mechanics to it, I swear. First and foremost, I'm going to get this out the way. The bottom helper always loves spamming a scales move. What the scales do is 2 things. One, it will put a chance of a turn just outright getting interrupted on that Kamihime that has it. And second, it increases the damage that the boss will end up doing to you with some attacks. So you do need to pay very close attention. And these scales do stack, so that means the more you got on them, the worse it can get. If you really want to be honest, if this one hates you so much, you can actually see it try to stack scales on the same character over and over and over again. And since it does it 3 times randomly, maybe in an extreme case of luck, you can see some character quickly get 10 plus scales on themselves. It's annoying. It's very annoying. But that's not even the worst of the helper issues. The second one, the one up top, this one is very specific on the killer actions you do. Now, there's a priority order for it, and it's listed here basically, but from highest priority to worst priority, highest priority, if you use a blue skill, a blue colored skill, it's going to remove 1 debuff from its entire ally group. So the helper is going to remove a debuff off it itself, the boss, and everything. If you use a green skill, and it doesn't even matter if it's a healing skill either, it's going to AoE nuke everybody for 20% of your max HP. If you use a yellow skill, it's going to put a damage cut on its entire group, meaning you're going to be dealing less damage. If it's a red skill, then it's going to recover HP, 150,000 HP to its entire group. Honestly, unless you really, really don't want something to happen, I don't pay attention to this too much, but you really should be a little bit wary about what you're doing because of this factor. The red skills are honestly going to get overwritten so much that it doesn't really matter too much, so if you really want to be the safest thing possible, just use nothing but red skills and call it a day. You can still debuff with some red skills anyway. But for those of you that do want to pay more attention, yellow skills, when you're buffing yourself, are generally that. So, say you're trying to pull off like more bursts or whatever, that's probably going to go off. If you're trying to heal or remove debuffs off yourself, be very careful of this move, because that AoE 20% can do numbers on you. It really could. And it can spam it too. As for the blue skill thing, it's not too much of a drawback, because generally you don't really care about attack down being on the helpers, you just want it on the boss. But it's the defense down that's an issue, because you want to get rid of the helpers as soon as possible. And that said too, the boss is highly, highly resistant to debuffs. There's a very good chance you're not debuffing her. So it's more trying to debuff the helpers, if you want to be honest. So my suggestion to you, if you're going to go that route, make sure there's like a few attack downs on the boss and then slap a defense down. That way it won't remove the defense downs for a while, if that. But priority order's been a little bit skewed. I don't know which one you really should take out first, the bottom one or the top one. They're both equally annoying. But you do want to get rid of the helpers before you go into the boss. As for the boss itself, this is a pain. This is a major pain. But anyways, if everybody's got scales on themselves, at least one, and its orbs are max, it's going to remove all the debuffs according to the number of scales. It's also going to deal damage. That's a bad thing, because this can outright wipe your party if you're really not careful. So you gotta make sure you have as little scales as possible, because if everybody's got scales on themselves, well, this boss is going to do that as its orb nuke. Now, normal mode, it's going to AoE hit everybody, and on top of that, lower their attack power, and has a chance of dizzy, so be very, very careful of that one. Between the dizzy and the scales, you can end up missing a lot of turns. As for raging, it will randomly hit 6 times, put energy drain on itself. And what the energy drain is, 10 times the damage it does to you in a normal hit is going to drain. So say it does 10,000, then it's healing by 100,000. But that's only off of its normal hits. Because it can combo a lot. Reason being, when you kill both the helpers, it puts both combo buffs up on itself. And if you don't have it, if it doesn't have at least one of them, and the orbs aren't max, or it's not in stun, of course, then it's going to reapply it. You can remove these, but there's no time limit. And quite frankly, it may be worth it to remove them just to get a free turn here and there, but other than that, it's pointless. But I've already mainly gave this strategy. You get the helpers out, and then the boss itself. Now, as for which helper to take out, again, I'm not personally sure. I hate the scales one more than the one that's got the color-coded abilities, but that's just me. But the one I see with the least amount of HP and when I hop into the fight is the one I'm going after, just to speed things up. Everybody should just focus their attention on one enemy. So whichever one ends up being lower is the one you kill first. Simple as that. Then you go for the boss. Now, the Thunder one. To be honest, I've only ever done this Thunder one twice, so I don't really know too much about it personally, but I can go over the stuff here. But this one is another one that only has one helper, and it's got 48 million HP. The boss itself has got 120 million. I think that's the general consensus for all the boss HPs, but I don't know. And this fight can be a little tricky. Now, for the helper itself, it's mainly trying to increase its mode gauge for everybody. So, these guys love spending their time in raging mode. Now, when it's in raging, it's going to try to increase the charges. Like when it and the boss is in raging, it's going to try and increase the charges the boss has. That means it's going to start overdriving you a lot faster, meaning you're going to get nuked a lot more often. That's a dangerous thing too. When it's in raging and the boss is in stun, it's going to try and heal the boss. Or even when it's in normal. Well, no, when the boss is in normal, it tries to raise its raging mode. But that's the thing. It's generally trying to keep raging going on, and it's trying to help out its boss. So, you do want to remove raging as quickly as possible. Also, when it's in normal mode and it gets the swords off, it's going right into raging. When it's in raging mode, it's going to lower your ability to decrease modes. Raging mode, and then it's also hitting everybody as well. Now, as for the boss itself, it's going to hit everybody with some lightning damage and increase its gauge in normal. In raging, it's just going to massively nuke everybody. Now, when its helper is dead, that's when things get a little weird. Because it's going to put depletion and paralysis on characters when it's not in raging. And those can really interrupt your turns or even your bursts and whatnot. It can interrupt turns, it can interrupt bursts, depletion will sip and screw with your abilities. That's a problem. Now for the raging nuke, it's going to randomly hit 5 times. And this is definitely its most threatening skill. Before it's nerfed, if you couldn't kill the boss before the helper died, then you're pretty much screwed. But that's the main gimmick of this fight. the helper tries a buff on the boss, and if the helper's dead, the boss just gets pissed. That's a better way to put it. Generally speaking, it may be argued to go after the boss first for this one, but I've seen it work both ways now that it's been nerfed. But again, safer strategy is to try and kill the boss, because you're going to not want to deal with its special moves, which only happens if the helper is dead. So there's that. Now the light one, oh boy, I hate the light one. Unfortunately, I have to grind it being a light main. But both helpers, 25 million HP. The boss itself, 120 million. And as for what they do, oh boy. Needless to say, both of the helpers have this weird mechanic where if they're enraging and there's not a single arrow debuff on any of your characters, it will try to put it on as many as possible. It'll just AoE spam it, and it's a chance to miss, but who knows. And the bottom one also will do it in normal mode, trying to do it to one character if they don't have arrows, and that's guaranteed to land, unless you just have some element deflection or something. Now, what makes this even worse is what happens with the helper up top. If it is in normal mode, it will give attack and defense up to its whole team, provided it does not have defense up. And in raging mode, it's the same thing, only with combo rate. So it's double and triple. But if it doesn't have triple, then it'll try to do that. Now that means if you somehow have a single target buff remover, then you can take it off the other two. But it's that one up top that's going to be the issue with that. When both the helpers do a normal overdrive nuke, it's going to try to debuff your attack power. Now with the bottom helper, it's going to remove buffs off yourself. It's going to do them one at a time, last I've checked. As for the top one, it's going to heal its own allies when it's enraging and does that. These two have to die first, starting with the top one and then the bottom. Because the top one's the buffer, and it's really going to make things a lot worse. The bottom one sticks those arrows on characters, and as far as I can tell, the arrows also work like an attraction effect, so enemies tend to target the ones with the arrows more than the other characters, so that's what I've noticed. As for the boss itself, normal mode, random 4-time hit, and it's going to do more damage if there's arrows on people, so keep that in mind. It will try to target the person with the arrows a lot more often with that. It can kill them if you're not lucky. And the raging one is random 5 times nuke. That was a attack that was most feared, this random 5 times nuke, but they since then lowered the attack power of it, so it's a lot better to deal with. It's not going to insta kill off of each hit, but as a compromise, it does go randomly. So if you're getting like 7,000-8,000 per hit, then yeah, you could easily see somebody die. But it's special mode too. When it goes into raging, then it's going to randomly hit somebody with a large amount of damage. But it's nothing to worry about too much. It's the first action it does when it goes into raging. I mean, it can hurt, but it's not that bad. Generally speaking, what you want to do, definitely kill the top helper first, and then go after the bottom one, and then the boss. While you're doing that, if you know the boss is about to nuke, get the arrows off yourself. Otherwise, you could see somebody die very quickly. Also, when it comes to the buffs from the top helper, you can remove the attack increase, but try to leave the defense one. That way, you're not taking extra damage, despite the fact that you're still dealing less. Now, when the combo buffs come in, there's not too much you can do. Just try to hopefully kill it before the defense buff wears off. Otherwise, it's going to recast its attack defense stuff. But other than that, it's not too much you can really do. The bottom helper, it's just arrow spam. If you can get rid of that top helper, you can always have the arrows off before the boss nukes, provided that your skills are ready. So that said, like say I have Soul as a healer, she can remove arrow buffs, debuffs, so if the top helper's dead and Soul's heal is at the ready, I can always have the arrows off me before the boss does its nuke. It does do a lot more damage with that normal mode nuke if the arrows are on you. So you have to be very careful of that. Not to mention, like I said, it loves to target the ones with the arrows. The boss itself, not too much trouble. Really isn't. You just have to be very, very careful with the arrow debuffs, and for the love of God, get rid of the top helper first, because that's the most annoying part of the fight. Now, this one I haven't done too much, but I still know the general mechanic with this one. 40 million HP for both helpers, 125 million for the boss itself. Hey, guess what? It's finally got something different for the boss HP. However, this boss is annoying, for lack of better words. There is so much stuff going on here. Be quite honest, I'm not even going to try to break this down, because it's all more or less based on if somebody doesn't have a certain effect on them, like say somebody doesn't have blind or somebody doesn't have poison. But the general thing about these fights is the fact that you're going to get hit with so many debuffs, and the boss itself is going to try to remove, and the helpers themselves are going to try to remove debuffs off their selves and everything. So you have to be very, very, just pay attention of what debuffs are on you and try to get rid of the ones that are going to be a problem. But it can do poison, it can do putrefy, it can do blind. I've seen a dizzy somewhere. There's any number of stuff it can really do. It really is. It's a lot to go over, but unfortunately I'm not going to do that in depth, because generally if you know what's going on in Ultimate, you can see what's going on in the Ragnarok fight. It's generally the same debuffs, it's just more adamant on you having them, and they do a lot of damage per turn, so keep that in mind. But keep in mind that the boss itself can do some ability seal and put damage cut on itself, and the damage cut only goes away when you hit it enough times. For raging, it's going to practically try to remove your enhancements. As for normal mode for the helpers, the top one's going to try to put debuffs on you. It says all enemies down. I think it's attack down. I forgot which one it was, but the other one's going to try to stick that dizzy, so be very, very careful. And Ruin could be a dangerous thing when it's in raging. The bottom one's in raging. So what Ruin is the fact that it will try to insta-kill somebody. If you do not get Ruin off you by the time it wears off, that character's dead, without fail. As for the helper up top, when it's in raging, it's randomly hitting 8 to 10 times. It can start doing a lot of damage. So that said, Calamity A and Calamity B are definitely the hardest parts of the fight. However, if one of them survives, it starts doing some special move where it will really start doing a lot of damage. So the general trick is to try and lower them both and then kill them both at the same time. As for the boss itself, you don't have to worry about too much crap, but when both Calamities are dead, it's going to up its avoidance rate, and then on top of that, it's going to remove all of its debuffs. But it'll only do it one time. So it will put an evasion on itself, so you might still see some stuff miss. Combined with blind, it's going to really be a problem. So this fight is so debuff heavy. And since you're not going to be removing them so frequently, your best bet is to try and get some resistance towards it. That's all I can really say. Also keep in mind that if someone does not have attack down, someone does not have blind, someone does not have poison, the boss is going to be doing one of its special moves. So you do have a lot to watch out for. Especially the attack down thing, because it's going to try and lower your fill rate on your burst gauges. And it's not the only boss to do that crap. But that's generally the stuff with Ragnarok fights. The Ragnarok Catastrophes. They can definitely be tricky, and even at my point, they can still kill my light team. But generally, it's not too bad. However, the Guardians are worse. And they are longer. Generally, the previous fights had somewhere about maybe about 170,000-ish HP total between everybody, to maybe 200,000. I mean, not thousand, millions. 170 million to like 200 million. Well, the bare minimum for these Guardian fights is 200 million for just one enemy. So keep that in mind. Now, starting with fire, this one loves spamming Dizzy and Confusion. Be very, very careful with that. Confusion might actually cause your characters to hit each other. And if either one is on somebody, you're going to get counter-nuked. So make sure you, without a doubt, do not have Dizzy or Confusion on your characters, especially since it lasts a very, very long time. 6 turns is a lot. But that's the main thing with this. You have to be very, very careful about that dizziness and that confusion. If you see either one of those characters, you get rid of it. However, I think confusion can prevent you from using abilities, so be very careful of that. Now, when it's in stun, when it's not in stun, it can randomly increase or decrease its orbs. So, if you're not lucky, you'll see its orb count start filling up pretty fast. And the thing is, too, when its HP is half or less, then it's going to remove all the debuffs off itself. So you have to keep that in mind. It's going to hit everybody, lower the attack power, lower the resistance towards debuffs, and it's going to remove all the debuffs off itself when its HP is cut in half. That's a major gimmick with a lot of bosses too. It'll remove all the debuffs off itself when its HP hits half. There was like at least 3 Guardians that do that. But the Dizzy and the Confusion is definitely the most threatening part of this fight, because you'll see random 3 nukes going off whenever someone has it. So make sure no one has those, especially since they last a long, long time. That is the main fact of this. Not to mention, if the boss happens to increase its charge turns and it becomes full, doesn't mean it's going to become 0 in that same turn. It means it's going to just stay full. So be very, very careful with that one. This water one, oh yeah, the fire boss has 230 million HP, by the way. But this water one, 210 million. And this water one is easily the hardest fight in the game right now. In fact, I think it's going to be the hardest fight, period, point blank, even after the Phantom one shows up. But this one, oh boy. Normal mode. Randomly hits 3 times, and it can do a poison that does 1,000 per tick. Raging mode. AoE. Still has the same poison. Now then, going into what the boss really does to make it tricky. First thing out the gate, it's hitting everybody and reducing the amount of burst gauge they can gain. So, say a normal attack gains 10, it's going to gain 5. And that's for 4 turns. That's the first action it takes. Now, when it gets transitioned into raging mode, it's going to immediately put 10 fish animals on itself. That counts as its buffs. And when it has a certain amount, it's going to increase its activation rate for combos by a huge amount. Not to mention, it's going to make its normal attacks go from single target to AoE. And the key number is 3. If it has at least 3, if it has at least 4, that's the key number. If it has at least 4, then it's going to do that. You don't want the combos to go off too much, and you definitely don't want normal hits to turn AoE. And it gives itself the whole, it gives itself 10 of that buff right out the gate when it goes into raging, so be very, very careful. The trick is to try and remove as much as possible. Now, when you use 3 or more bursts, it's going to try and reduce your burst gauge increase again. However, that will take one of those water fishes off itself. So, those of you that are familiar with characters like Neptune, she's more or less got the same mechanics, only much, much worse. That's the whole general consensus. You're trying to get the fish off her, so buff removal is very, very helpful in this. Not to mention, definitely try to spam as much defense down as you can so you can speed the fight up. But you also have to be wary of the poison as well. There's just one major problem though. Its resistance to debuffs is very, very high. So, hopefully you'll land some debuffs, but there's a good chance you probably won't. So, be very, very careful with that one. But generally, that raging mode is going to be very, very threatening. Now, the wind one. She's the pushover of the group, if you ask me. She also has the most HP out of any of the elemental guardians at 250 million. However, she has the least debuff resistance. It is so low that you can reliably spam Dizzy and even Paralyze on her. So keep that in mind. However, debuff spam is her specialty as well. And the weird thing about her is the fact that her special skills are based on how many orbs are full. So, that said, you will probably not get any use out of blinding her. So, don't really bother. However, if you increase her charge turns, she's pretty much guaranteed to normal attack after a certain point. So, I like using Raphael in that fight just for that reason, because she can sit up and manipulate her around the orb count of 5, even though she's supposed to have a max of 4. Now, as for the effects, when its orbs are full, normal mode is going to randomly hit 3 times, raging mode is going to hit everybody. The one that's more threatening is probably going to be the normal mode, because it's going to randomly put paralysis, so it can be up to 3 people to get hit with that one. Raging's just going to put it says rot, but it's really putrefy or something like that. But either way, it's going to increase its own defense. The best time to remove the defense buff off itself is actually stun. Otherwise, just don't worry about it. Now, as for what it does for each part of the moves and effects, when it has no orbs, it's going to do poison damage to everybody. It's going to poison everybody, and that lasts for 4 turns. When it has 1 orb, it's going to attack down for 3 turns. When it has 2 orbs, it's going to blind for 3 turns. When it has 3 orbs, it's going to defense down for 3 turns. All of these are AoE. Her whole gimmick is pretty much AoE damage. So keep that in mind. And of course, when her HP is cut in half, then she'll remove all her debuffs, as long as she's not in stun. The whole gimmick of this fight is not just the debuffs, but also that normal mode too, because if the paralysis wasn't enough, the damage she does in normal mode is based off of the debuffs, and the damage he does in Raging mode with its full orb nuke is also based off the number of debuffs you have. So the more debuffs you have, the more damage you're taking from those, even if you lowered her attack power and whatnot. That said, you need to get these debuffs off of you as much as possible. Now, generally, you can get like some protection against them across all elements. I've seen it, but you can't really outright block them unless you have the specific team for that. Ironically, Light has it. It just needs some help from my soul. But you can get most, if not all, the debuffs off you pretty easily. And if you do put an extra orb turn on her, then the 5th turn is just a normal attack. So abuse the crap out of that if possible. Especially if she's in stun, because it's a straight normal attacks, then you're just not getting debuff. The debuffs are really the biggest part of the fight, and that poison can start taking out a lot of HP if you leave it on. Same thing with the corruption off of its raging. But other than that, it's more or less trying to delay the fight because it's got a lot of HP. In fact, that's the one reason I cannot solo this fight, because of the fact that her HP is so high and my damage is just not there yet. But other than that, it's not too bad. But when it has 4 orbs, it's going to normal attack, provided it's not full. So be very, very, keep that in mind. Now, I mentioned this before, but yeah, this one, there's a previous video I should have uploaded by now, and this one is going to be a problem, because this one is, if you cannot get past that first raging mode, then this fight's going to pretty much just own you. But this is another one that's very, very difficult because of that reason, and it is a one-time I will flat out say, bring mode gauge reduction. I'm not talking something that increases the rate you do it, but something that flat out just does it. So that's going to be very helpful in this fight. But anyways, the Thunder Guardian. 220 million HP. Normal mode. When it hits people, it's going to up its own defense. Do not even think about removing this until it goes into Raging. Raging mode is going to randomly deal damage 3 times, and its increased damage if somebody's paralyzed. It's also going to have increased damage thanks to this next little mechanic. Now, the first action after it enters Raging mode is going to pretty much put paralysis on everybody for 1 turn. Also, when its HP is cut in half and it's in normal mode, it's going to put paralysis on everybody for 2 turns. That's the main thing with that. The tricky part of this fight is when it gets into Raging, because it will put a buff on itself which acts like Vigor, only it doesn't use its own HP, it uses its Raging meter. That said, you reduce that Raging meter as fast as possible. That way you're not getting insta-killed by its hits. It does insane damage when it is very, very high on that Raging meter on the first one. Now, say you make it through all of that, the second one is going to sit and put a self-debuff on itself and remove that little Vigor thing. And that's going to pretty much increase the damage you deal to it, but that's only for that short time while it's in stun. After that, just do the fight normally, you will never see that Vigor buff again. It's the first Raging mode that makes it a problem. That said, how direct Raging mode reduction works is that, say somebody reduces the mode gauge by 30%, it's only 30% of what's left. So if it's 100%, you get the full 30. But say it's half, then you're only removing 15%. That's what I'm pretty much going by. Now, that said, I use the Light team for pretty much all my content, my harder content, and combining Raphael with, Awaken Raphael, I should say, with, Gilgamesh's direct mode gauge reduction on a soul. I tend to use Hercules for that. The two of them combined will drop this boss's Raging meter from 100% to 54 in one shot. that is extraordinarily helpful. Other things that can help you out is orb manipulation. Again, Raphael has that. She's just made for a lot of these raid fights, if you want to be honest. But orb manipulation, definitely get some attack down if you can, because this boss is going to hit you very, very hard. You're going to need damage cut or you're going to die. You are going to need damage cut or you're going to die. Kudos for those that got Awakened Gaia. But, excuse me. But, that's the main thing. The first raging mode. Because for those of you that don't know what Vigor does, the higher something is, the bigger damage output that the person under Vigor has. This boss can do that based off of his raging meter, and you already know where that's going. You will see one-shots if you're not careful. So be very, very careful. Speaking of another one where you have to be careful and probably pay attention. The White Guardian. 210 million HP. And I've done this a lot, so I've pretty much got this down pat. I honestly don't even need to look at the stuff on screen, but I'm still going to do so anyways. But normal mode, it's full orb nuke because it's got weird mechanics anyways, but you still got to pay attention. Normal mode, it's going to put attack up and defense down on your team for one turn. Raging is going to put light resistance down, but dark elemental up, because it's expecting you to do this with a dark team anyway. Now, if you do not get rid of any sort of defense downs or elemental resistance drops, you're going to eat a nuke the very next turn. So she can indeed nuke you twice in a row. Or if you're really ballsy and you have a character that actually will debuff itself on defense, you will still see this happen. So be very careful. But that said, it's all about removing those. The easiest way is to bring Maiden's Prayer, Vivian's debuff removal skill. Because you don't want a single character to have either one of those effects, or you'll see multiple people pay for it most likely. If anyone has defense down, everybody's getting hit. If anyone has light resistance down, random 7 hits. And those are deadly. They're very, very deadly. This boss hits pretty hard. So you do not want to get nuked as much as possible. You want to avoid all that damage. Also, to make things worse, it's got that same mechanic where if its HP is cut in half, it's going to sip and remove all of its debuffs. Big whoop. The tricky part of it is where it's going to put attack up on itself. 3 different frames of it, I think. And that's going to really increase the damage it does with its nukes. It's going to really hurt then. And then it's a random 6 times when it has full orbs after that point. I've seen it practically one-shot teams before, because there wasn't enough to attack down on her and she had those buffs on herself and whatnot. So there's 2 things you want in this fight. Removing the buffs off of her for one, because that's just going to stick there until you get rid of them. And then you also want to be able to remove debuffs off yourself. Otherwise, you're going to pretty much get double tapped the whole fight. So that said, that's the biggest gimmick with this fight. You do not want those debuffs on you. Be very careful of that. Now then, the Dark Guardian. This is the one that has the least amount of HP. Doesn't mean she's a pushover. 200 million HP. What she does is randomly hit you 3 times in normal mode with her full orbs. Full orb nuke on Raging is going to do AoE damage to everybody and remove 30 off your burst gauges. She does not like you doing bursts. Make matters a little bit worse, the first time it hits Raging mode, which is generally about 30% of its health gone, it may or may not be that much, but it's usually around that mark. But first time it enters Raging mode, it's going to up its own attack power and up its own combo buffs. The attack buff will not stay, so after 3 minutes it's gone. The combo buff will, but you can still remove those with buff removal. It's also going to lower its resistance to debuffs. That's your chance to actually start landing your own, because it can be pretty resistant until that point, but it's not impossible. But the second part is where it gets interesting. The second one is when it has 40% or less HP. It's going to increase its dark attribute up, so if it has the attack up at the same time, it's going to really start hurting. The tricky part of this fight is where it gets a little bit interesting with the additional effects. It will put 2 skull buffs on itself. One, if it double attacks, which is a white skull, it's going to remove 30 burst gauge off of that character. If it triple attacks, which is the black skull, it will put a 2-turn paralysis on that character. You want to remove these, because these do not go away just like the combo buffs, but you can still remove them with buff removal. So you're going to need 4 buff removals throughout this fight. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit problematic. Thankfully, its orbs has a lot. It's going to be 4 orbs before it tries a nuke. 5 if you manage to extend it. So you got a little bit of leeway between the nukes and all that. But your main thing is to try and get the skulls off of it. But in order to do that, you have to get the combo buffs off first, because they're always cast before the skulls. And then you still got to worry about when it's enraging, because it's going to try and slow down your burst rate. So be very, very careful with that one. Now, this is the one we do not have, but I'm still going to go over it anyway. And this one's got a lot of mechanics, so you really want to pay attention. First and foremost, this is going to be a Phantom Element fight. This is the only Phantom Element raid fight we have for permanent content, as of when it comes out. But keep in mind that it does not mean that this fight's very, very difficult. This means that you can pretty much use any element you want that works for you. So keep that in mind. You're dealing weakness. You're going to deal extra damage because of weakness due to that, but you're also going to take it from normal hits if she does them. And this is where things get a little bit interesting. It's always got these special mechanics that it does, and it's not based on the players that trigger them, it's based on when you trigger them. So, for instance, say you hopped into the same raid with me, I could be on the fire part of it, while you could be on the dark part. Simple as that. Second, bring damage cut. A lot of it. You will die if you do not bring damage cut and this fight lasts long enough. You have to be careful. Another thing that greatly helps, increase its orb count, because it only has 1 before it nukes, and if she's enraging, it's going to be very frequent. But pretty much this is what you're going to have to worry about. Starts off, if it has none of those elemental buffs on itself, it's going to do a dark one. Oh, you can't remove these buffs either. It's going to do darkness to everybody and removes everybody's burst gauge by 20. So it's going to do Aratron, the Dark Guardians thing. It's going to enhance its defense and sip and do damage to everybody, just like Bether would do, the wind one. But this only happens if the dark buff's already up. If the wind buff is already up, it's going to do fire damage to everybody, and I forget what disruption is, but I'm going to have to look it up. And that's what Phaleg does, basically. Disruption might be dizzy or confusion, I don't know. But the light one, attack up to itself. And it's going to randomly hit 6 times with light damage. That's the Haggith buff, only if the fire buff's already up. If the light buff is up, it's going to do spread to itself. Or wait, it says spread to all enemies, but I don't think spread really does to anything. I think it's spread to itself. It makes more sense. but it's going to do spread to itself, meaning it's going to start AoE hitting everybody, and deal water damage to everybody. That's an Ophio buff, which is after the light one is up. When the water one is up, thunder damage to everybody, paralyzed for 2 turns, and that's a full buff. When all 6 elements are up, it's going to deal extreme damage, phantom element. That means no elemental cuts. Phantom element. And that's a problem. Yeah, the fire one's confusion. That's what the disruption is. But that's the whole trick with this fight. It's going to deal different nukes whenever its orbs is full, and based off of the buffs it has. And it's going to get worse and worse as it goes. The burst gauge reduction, not too much of a problem. Defense increase, just remove it. Confusion might be an issue. Attack up on itself, just remove it. Spread, I don't know if you can remove it or not. I would try. I'm going to see if you can remove it. Yeah, you can remove it. So good for that. Paralyze, you want to defend against that. You don't want to waste any turns. The Phantom Nuke is going to be the dangerous part of this fight, because despite all these other nukes that do all this other stuff, the Phantom Nuke, if you do not use any sort of damage cut, is going to be 60,000 AoE. 60,000 AoE. If you want to be even having a chance of surviving this, you need a lot of HP and enough damage cut to keep it below that point. In my case, I can get about 27,000 max. I still need at least 60% damage cut in order to survive that nuke. You do not want to screw around with this boss. You do not. You kill her ASAP. You increase that orb count. You reduce her orb count if you can. And for the love of God, have damage cut if you're about to get hit with the Phantom Nuke. Otherwise, you will see your party get wiped. You will see them get wiped. So, yeah, Joan users are going to be very welcome in that raid. But, that's the whole thing. You want to know what makes this even worse? Is the simple fact that this is going to be the raid that will give you the most item later down the line, called pages. And it may even outright drop the rainbow books. But those pages are used to trade for rainbow books in order to get the 4th tier souls. Because we're going to have books better than the gold and the silver ones, but that's only for 4th tier souls. This is your best way of getting it. However, I don't remember if I covered it in a previous video, but you only get 1 guaranteed Phantom raid to open every single day when she comes out. After that, it is random based on the other raid you open. So if you do not start raids, you're probably not going to start a Phantom one. And the Phantom one's going to be the one that everybody's going to be looking out for, because that's going to give you the better reward drops. Outside of course, you know, the Phantom treasures in order to get the Guardian, because the Guardian's not that great, but it's better than nothing. At least you don't need nowhere near as many Phantom treasures as you do for the other stuff. But she doesn't give any weapons, so yeah. But either way, that's it for this video. Sorry for being so long, but I wanted to try and condense the raids into 2 videos. Otherwise, you'll see like 4 or 5 videos on this stuff. But generally, this is covering all the permanent raid content we have thus far. There is supposedly rumors that they're going to release Guardian Plus or something that's higher than the Guardian fights, apparently. No guarantees that might be a thing. It's still a rumor, of course, but if it does come out, then general speculation is that it's going to work like the Ragnarok Catastrophes, where they're going to have helpers, they're going to have more HP, they might have worse strategies to deal with, too. There's also the possibility that they might even have the weird mechanic that some later guild competitions had, where if you do not use elemental advantage, your damage dealt to the boss is going to be drastically reduced by like 90%. I don't know. But either way, given how all these fights work and whatnot, you generally do want to build up multiple teams. You can still do this 1 guaranteed team. hopefully it's light or darker, you're going to have weakness damage. But generally, you want to be able to do this with as many elements as possible. You want water for the fire one, thunder for the water one, fire for a wind, and so on and so forth, in order to take advantage of the elemental differences and whatnot, because these fights are pretty much made for when you have advantage. It's not like you can't clear it without them, but still. And if you're trying to solo these fights, you do need advantage. I'm pretty sure of that one. There's a few exceptions to that rule, but at the same time, your best bet is with advantage. But anyways, that's all for this. There's not going to be any other guided videos for a while because there's not really too much to do anything with that. What I may do down the line is go over the 4th tier souls, because of course players are going to want to look into that one. But I will say this, out the gate, without going into major details, there are arguably 3 or 4 4th tier souls you're going to aim for out the gate. Medea and Yuri are going to be 2 of them right off the top, because those are the best 2, period. Medea is like Solomon on crack. Yuri is like Shingen on crack. That's the best way to put that. And the thing with Yuri is the fact that she's very fast, but you have to have specific teams built around her. She can actually turn out worse than Shingen, so not everybody can use her. Medea is a pick up and go soul that you could just do absurd damage with. So Medea is the safest bet to go with. Others that you may get: 4th tier Andromeda. I forgot her name. She heals a crap ton of HP. She's got revivals. Honestly, if you have maxed out Ascension, she can give 18,000 HP back to one character while still having an AoE revive, while still healing everybody for 6,000 at that point. Because her flat heal is her basic heal is 2,000 and Ascension effectively triples that. So yeah, she's pretty strong. Also, another one that people will probably generally get is Kaspar, which is the 4th tier D'Artagnan. She's a very well-rounded soul, and a lot of her stuff's based off of snatch mechanics, but she can be a damage dealer, she can be a healer or a buffer, she can be a debuffer, she can be whatever you want to set her up for. She will be the jack of all trades, so she's also a pretty safe bet to go for too. But 4th tier souls, you're going to need to be able to do all these raids, and that's why I set up and set these raid videos, because you need so much crap to get those 4th tier souls, and raids are definitely going to give you a bulk of that, so keep that in mind. But anyways, if I do any more videos that's guide based, it's probably going to be off of that, because I more or less cover what needs to be covered. I'm not going to do anything like a tier list or anything like that, because there's too much stuff in the game to really make one out of, and it's still subjective, because, for instance, there's characters that everybody generally considers very, very good across the board, like Michael or Soul or Dion. But there's a few where it's like niche terms, because honestly, I love using arrows, but if I don't really need her ailment block, then she's kind of just not, I just don't put her in the party. That's what I mean. I can't really do a tier list for stuff, but I can say that there are some characters that are just flat out better than others. Either way, it wouldn't matter to the players that are entirely free, because they got to use whatever they get. Anybody that can go buy miracle tickets or gacha pools or whatever, then yeah, they're probably going to want to know that stuff. But if you're an entirely free player, you're just stuck with whatever. Once you reroll, that's it. But other than that, the only other thing I can really do is add Dolans, and everybody's got the general consensus of that. Get the 100% add Dolans, get the Kaisers, there you go. But anyways, that's pretty much all for that. There's not too much more I can really do on guide videos at this point, unless I just go back and redo some old ones. And I've redone the beginner's guide so many times, I'm just not going to bother. But anyways, that's all for this. More of this will come soon, and take care.